everyone, it's Jan with What You Make It, and I don't know about you, but this year I am planning to get my Christmas cards made and mailed early. And if I'm going to do that, I've got to start now. So I thought I would share a few Christmas card ideas with some techniques that you could do to kind of mass produce your cards. Even if you don't want to make Christmas cards, some of these techniques would be great for any card that you might want to make right now, particularly this faux metal background that I'm going to show you how to make. The key to getting this really highly textured background is layering. I began by using a cover plate to cut out this diamond pattern, but if you don't have a die that does that, you might want to use your Cricut or your Silhouette or whatever. What you want is an overlay pattern that has a lot of open space in it, because what we're going to do is add texture to the second piece. And I did that with an impression plate, or you could do it with an embossing folder. Either one will work. What you want is the top to be smooth and open, and then you want the back piece to have the texture. So when we layer them together, you actually get this kind of faux double embossing look to it. Very easy to do, but gives you a great result. So we're now going to add the top piece to it, and I use the zip dry glue when I'm working on this for a couple of reasons. I like a lot of other adhesives, but for a project like this, this is the best solution that I found. Unless you have a really large Xyron machine where you can run it through and make it a sticker. This glue is actually kind of like that rubber cement that we used to use in school, and once it is dry, it actually, you can roll any extra residue. So if any of it seeps out, and it will on these little delicate pieces, once it is dry, you just have to use your fingers and rub the excess off. What you don't want is to have little stray pieces of glue sticking out, because it will act as a resist. So now I'm going to use gesso, and this actually kind of helps make the whole piece look like it's one, the two pieces look like it's one piece of paper. So I use a very thin layer of gesso. You don't want it to go on super thick, because you'll begin to lose that embossed detail in the background, but the gesso will help both of those pieces of paper begin to look like they are just one. You want to let that be good and dry, and then I'm going to use some acrylic paints, and these that I am using happen to be Sable Brown and Tan by Claudine Helmuth, and then this Lumiere kind of a pearlescent kind of paint I'm going to mix in. Claudine Helmuth's acrylics are really thick, so I'm adding a little extender medium, matte medium, to thin them out a little bit, because again, I don't want this paint to go on very thick at all. I'm looking for it to have coverage, and it's going to show through a little bit, but you want to get color over the entire background, but you want to keep that paint really nice and thin. And when I had it all covered, then I went in, and now I'm adding some contrasting color in that with that sable brown. Again, you're not going to see a lot of this. This is messy fun, folks. You should just let your little artist heart go wild and just mix the paint and throw it on there. Again, at the very end, I'm just kind of making sure I don't have any thick globs anywhere. So now is where the magic comes, and I'm using this Inca Gold paste, and I find that using a couple of different colors together actually gives you a better look. So I'm using antique or vintage silver, which is the top one, and then this gold, and I'm using them at the same time. I'm kind of going back and forth. Now, I'll just tell you, your fingers get kind of inky, but there's nothing so satisfying as having inky fingers and a really cool background. So go ahead, get your fingers dirty, polish it up when it's done, and you'll love it. Now, for the poinsettia on the card, last year I did this tutorial on how I made these poinsettias with the Tim Holtz tattered poinsettia and die and embossing folder. So go watch that to get to the point where I'm at this point, whereas I've used Distress Stain to stain up the leaves. I used fired brick, Victorian velvet, and I think a touch of aged mahogany to stain the leaves. And now I'm going to accentuate the embossing. And this is where I just think this die and embossing folder just bring these flowers to life. And I'm using just a little bit of that red Inca Gold, and the raised portions, I'm just touching them with my finger and I'm putting that red on top, and so it's going to tie into the background. Then I go back and I use some of the gold so that we have, again, just a very rich and luxurious. And you see I'm doing these kind of in batch. So this is why it would be a great card to do because you can make a lot of them fairly easily just by doing it step by step. Now I'm adding some just almost straight aged mahogany Distress Stain here so that I really deepen up those petals. I found that doing it after I put the Inca Gold on, because the Inca Gold is kind of waxy, you get a richer result. Okay, so this is the part of the card that was inspired by a challenge over on Paper Tray Ink's blog this week, and that was to do a multi-stamped background, meaning that you use at least 2 different stamps to create your background. And so I am going to use my script stamp here in a little bit darker color than my paper. And you noticed I kind of looked where I was going to put that poinsettia, and so that it's going to be, the seam is going to be hidden back there. So for my second stamp, I am using this Flourish stamp. And again, I'm wanting all these pieces to kind of flow together. And so I'm going to do some gold embossing with this. Again, you can see how quickly you could sit down in an evening and just stamp a whole bunch of these. That's what I'm planning to do. I made several of them when I was working on this. Very easy to make all the pieces. You just kind of do it assembly line, and then it goes together really quickly. So I'm putting some detailed fine gold embossing powder on here, and together they kind of make this festive background. There's something about script stamps and swirls that just say Christmas to me. So I'm going to use my heat tool to melt the embossing powder, and I think it's a really subtle background, but I love that it kind of adds just one more layer of texture to the overall card. And that's the whole point when we're doing stuff like this, is we want it all to just look like it was intended to go together. I'm going to add a little bit of Distress ink, I believe that's Walnut Stain, around the edges there. Again, just giving it a finished edge and tying those pieces together. And I use it on the poinsettias as well, just kind of making them all just a little more aged. Now for my sentiment, I am using this die and stamp from Paper Tray Ink. It's called Boutique Borders. This was the baby one, but you can see obviously I'm using it for Christmas because there was a sentiment stamp in Peaceful Pine Cones, kind of a rustic Merry Christmas, that I'm using. It fits right in there, and I'm going to emboss it with gold as well. When you're doing sentiments and that sort of thing, make sure you're using fine detail embossing powder, or you'll lose a little bit of that crispness. I heat set that. Again, this is one of those things that you could do in bulk. You can see I was working on more than one at a time. Just kind of do your step, each step, get them all made, and then when you sit down to put them all together, it goes really, really super quickly. So just again, adding a little bit of Distress Stain to that. Now it's time to start putting our card together, and I'm starting with a standard A2 card base, but I'm using really good adhesive because this cover, card cover, is a little heavier and I don't want it to pull up. And I'm going to pop up that strip on some pop dots or dimensional adhesive, and then I'm going to put that down. And then I wanted to have some little scraggly twine coming out, so I just cut some lengths, put some hot glue down, and quickly put those in place. In the end, on this particular one, you don't really see much of those little twine pieces, but on some of the others I cut them a little longer, and I actually kind of like it. It's just another little visual texture. Do as I say, not as I do. You see, I finally had enough sense to get another instrument to poke down the center. Don't use your fingers. Even me, who has asbestos fingers, had no business putting my finger down in there in that hot glue, because that's a really high temp glue gun. Adding some of the leaves, and those leaves were just created by staining up one of the large tattered poinsettia flowers with green and adding gold to it, and then cutting them apart. It's easier for me to place them where I want. So I put a dimensional on the sentiment out at the end, a little glue, hot glue to attach it, and the final touch is a little bit of peeled paint distress stickles, because most poinsettias their centers are a little green. So there you have it. That is the final card with this version, and I love how it turned out. It's just kind of fun and festive and easy to make. Now here's another version that I still had some of those pink poinsettias from last year, and I thought, well, they would really do better with more of kind of an antique silver patina. So I made a little bit different version, added some greenery with it, but so very much fun. Even if you don't want to do a Christmas card, these backgrounds would just be so fun to make for any card. I'll be back with some other cards soon, and I hope you're having a great summer headed towards Christmas. Be sure and take some time for creative play. I'll see you soon.